Most brides carry a bouquet down the aisle. But she's carrying a pouch of silver to a horse trader. Instead of a wedding dress, she's buying a Navy Colt and a ticket to the jagged Redwater canyons. Her domestic future died when her homestead burned, and now she's trading a dowry for a lethal chance at vengeance. Her name was Clara Voss, and 3 days ago she had a life. A man who loved her. A house with real glass windows, the kind her mother had always wanted and never gotten. A cedar chest full of silver coins, saved one at a time over 4 years, every skipped luxury and every extra hour of work compressed into cold metal, meant for a wedding that was 14 days away. She'd counted those days the way children count toward Christmas, with a kind of focused joy she hadn't let herself feel in years. 3 days ago, the Redwater Boys rode through their valley. They didn't stop to talk. She heard the horses first. The sound was wrong from the beginning. Too many, too fast, the particular thunder of men who aren't coming to visit. Then shouting. Then Daniel's voice cutting through it, sharp and short, and then not cutting through anything anymore. Then the fire, which started in the barn and moved to the house with a speed that felt almost personal, like it had somewhere to be. She'd been at the creek, 200 yards east, drawing water for the evening. She ran back. She was too late for Daniel. She was barely in time for herself. By morning, there was nothing left. Not the house, not Daniel, not the cedar chest, not the 14 days. Nothing but ash and the particular silence that follows catastrophe. The silence that isn't peace, but is what happens after everything that made noise is gone. The sheriff in Millhaven was a man named Calhoun. He'd been sheriff for 11 years and had developed, over that time, a finely tuned instinct for trouble he couldn't win. He looked at his boots when she walked in, which told her everything before he opened his mouth. "Miss Voss," he said, "I understand what you've been through, truly, and I want you to know this office takes it seriously." She waited. The Redwater Boys have 30 men, maybe more now. They've been recruiting out of the border camps. I have 4 deputies, one of whom has a bad knee, and a jail that flooded last spring and hasn't been right since. If I ride out there with what I've got, I'm not coming back. And then this county has no law at all. She set the silver pouch on his desk. The sound it made was heavier than she expected. All those years of saving compressed into a single impact. "Then I'll do it myself." Calhoun looked at the pouch, looked at her, opened his mouth, closed it again. She picked the pouch back up and walked out. The horse trader's name was Eli Pruitt. He operated out of a yard on the south end of Millhaven, behind a fence made of mismatched wood and stubbornness. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand from an incident he never explained, and he had the particular wariness of a man who'd been lied to by enough people that he'd stopped giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. He listened to what she wanted. Then he looked at her the way men do when they've already formulated the word no and are just deciding how to dress it up. "Navy Colt, a reliable horse that knows canyon terrain, a week's supplies, and a bedroll," she said. "I know what it costs. I have the silver." "You want to tell me what for?" "No." Pruitt studied her for a long moment. There was something in her face that gave him pause. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more durable than anger. Something that had already made its decisions and was now just handling logistics. "You know what's in the Redwater Canyons?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "The men who burned my home and killed Daniel Harte," she said. "How much?" He laughed once, short and involuntary. Then he looked at her eyes and stopped. He'd seen grief before, plenty of it. This was a frontier town, and grief came with the territory. But this was something grief had already passed through and left behind. Something harder. Something that had been refined by 3 days of walking through ash and sleeping on bare ground and arriving at a conclusion that most people never let themselves reach. He took the silver, every coin. He gave her a gray mare named Vessel, who knew the canyon terrain better than most horses and better than most men. A Colt Navy that had been used once and maintained well, powder and ball for 30 shots. Dried beef and hardtack for 8 days, and a bedroll that had seen better years but would serve. "You come back through," he said as she was mounting up. "I'll give you fair price on whatever you want to sell." She looked at him. "Including the Colt," he added. She rode out without answering. The Colt was heavier than she'd expected, cold in a way that went beyond the morning temperature. She'd fired her father's rifle 100 times growing up, had learned to shoot the way frontier girls learn, practically, without ceremony, because accuracy was a survival skill and sentiment was a luxury. But a rifle was a tool. You used it for game, for snakes, for the occasional necessity. This was different. This was a weapon designed for one specific application. Built for the particular purpose of putting a man down before he could put you down first. Holding it felt like a confession of intent, like signing a document in a language she'd never spoken before, but apparently already knew. She loaded it on the road out of town, not waiting until she reached cover or distance. There was no point in waiting. Safe was no longer a destination she expected to reach. The Redwater canyons ran for 40 miles, through broken country that the maps didn't accurately capture, which was probably intentional on someone's part. The terrain shifted constantly. Open flats that funneled into sudden narrows, ridgelines that looked accessible from below and weren't, dry creek beds that became the only viable paths and then ended without warning against sheer rock faces. It was country that punished assumption and rewarded patience. Clara had patience in supply. The smell hit her on the second day. Dust and something underneath it, older and darker, like the rock itself had absorbed 100 years of violence and was slowly releasing it back into the air. She'd heard people describe the canyons as beautiful. She could see what they meant in the abstract. But beauty requires a certain safety of distance, and she was too close for distance. She spent the first 2 days reading the land rather than crossing it, finding water, identifying the trails that showed regular use. Vessel was steady and smart, picking her footing without drama, and Clara was grateful for the animal's competence in a way that went beyond the practical. Alone in that terrain, with nothing but her own judgment and a loaded Colt between herself and whatever came next, competence was the most comforting thing in the world. She found the first man on the afternoon of the 3rd day. His name, she learned afterward, was Cord. He was sitting alone at a low fire, boots off, rifle propped against a rock, a comfortable 6 feet away from his right hand. The posture of a man who believes himself safe because he's been safe here before. He looked up when she rode in from the South Trail, his expression running through the same quick sequence she'd watched on Pruitt's face. Assessment. Confusion. The stubborn male refusal to update the picture in his head to match the reality in front of him. A woman. Alone. This deep in the canyons. "You lost, sweetheart?" "No," she said. She stopped Vessel 12 feet from the fire, close enough to talk, far enough to see both his hands. "My name is Clara Voss. You rode through the Harte Valley 3 days ago. You burned a homestead and killed a man named Daniel Harte." Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, she thought, or something close to it. "Tell me where the main camp is," she said. "All of it. Numbers, layout, who's in charge." He moved for the rifle. He was faster than she'd expected. A genuine attempt that might have worked against someone who hesitated. She didn't hesitate. Her hand had already been moving. The canyon swallowed the shot without returning it. No echo. Just the sound going into the rock and staying there. She sat for a long time after. The fire crackled. Vessel shifted her weight and was still. She wasn't waiting for regret. She was waiting to find out who she was now. It was an honest question, and she believed it deserved an honest answer rather than one she manufactured in advance. The answer, when it settled, was quiet and clear. Still Clara Voss. Still moving forward. Changed in a specific way that she understood would be permanent, but still herself. Still pointed in the same direction. She searched his saddlebag before she left. Found $12, a folded piece of paper with names on it, and a rough map. She kept all 3. The second man found her first. She was navigating a narrow section of trail when she heard the hammer cock behind her left ear. Close. Professional distance. The sound of someone who had practiced this. She stopped Vessel and went completely still, both hands visible on the reins. "Drop the iron. Nice and slow." His voice was low and controlled. The voice of someone who'd done this enough times that the fear had been replaced by procedure. "Women in the canyons alone always got a story. What's yours?" Her mind ran the options in the 2 seconds she had available. Going for the Colt was a death sentence at this distance. Running was the same. That left talking. "Silver," she said. "I heard one of your boys was sitting on a private stash out here. I want a cut. I know where he camps." Silence behind her. She counted her own heartbeats. "Cord was supposed to be watching that south trail," he said slowly. "Cord's dead," she said. "Somebody got to him 2 days ago. That's how I knew where to look." Another silence. Longer. She felt him recalculating. "Who are you?" "Someone who can tell you where to find what Cord was guarding," she said. "If we can reach an arrangement." He reached for her arm to pull her around, and she let him, because the geometry was finally working in her favor. As he turned her, her right hand came across, and the Colt was already clear of the holster, already moving upward, and by the time his brain registered what his eyes were seeing, the moment was gone. 2. She watched the camp from the ridge for most of 2 days, moving only when she had to. She counted fires, counted faces, counted the patterns of movement. 11 men visible. Possibly more she hadn't seen. 11 was not 3. 11 was a number that required either an army or intelligence, and she had neither. What she had was time, a clear head, and the willingness to think past the obvious approach. There was one man she kept coming back to. Older than the others, maybe 45, with a deliberate quality to his movements. the kind of economy that comes from long experience doing things that require precision. The others deferred to him without obvious hierarchy. She filed his face. She rode east before dawn on the second day. The mining camp was exactly where she'd noted it on the way in. She rode in at the kind of hour when the first shift is already up and the night shift hasn't yet found its sleep. When men are tired enough to be honest. The foreman's name was Grady. He was enormous in the way of men who have done physical labor their entire lives, every inch of him dense and deliberate, a face weathered past any particular age. He heard her out across a battered table, a tin cup of coffee in one hand, not interrupting, not shifting in his seat. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You took down 2 of the Redwater Boys by yourself," he said. "In their own territory." "Yes." He looked at his coffee, looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not admiration exactly, something more like recalibration. A man updating his model of what was possible. "They hit our supply wagon 4 months ago," he said. "Killed one of my men, 23 years old." He set down the cup. "How many do you need?" They hit the camp at first light on a Tuesday, coming from 3 directions, across terrain Grady's men knew from their own prospecting work in the area. 6 miners, Clara, and the element of surprise, which turned out to matter more than any other factor. The camp became noise and smoke and movement within seconds of the first shot. Clara went in low, vessel steady beneath her, the Colt working in a rhythm that bypassed thought entirely. She took a graze along the outside of her left shoulder that burned sharply, and then receded into background. She noted it and moved on. She'd been watching for him since they started. The older one, the deliberate one. She'd decided he was Deke Harrow, whose name had appeared on the folded list from Cord's saddlebag. Listed first, which meant something. She spotted him at the far end of camp, making for the horses with the calm efficiency of a man who has executed retreats before and knows exactly how they're done. No panic, no wasted motion. Just the practiced withdrawal of someone who understands that living to fight another day is a legitimate outcome. She ran, not rode, ran, dismounting in motion, her boots hitting the ground at a speed that Vessel would have found concerning under other circumstances. She cut the angle to the horses hard, moving across ground that was rough and uneven and didn't care, and she got there before he did. He turned when she stepped into his path, assessed her in a single glance, made the wrong calculation, and swung. She ducked low under it, the full, committed drop that trades elegance for survival, and came up driving her elbow into the hinge of his jaw with everything her legs could push into it. The sound it made was specific. He went down hard. She put her boot on his chest and the Colt on his forehead before he finished landing. His eyes came into focus, looked up at her. She watched him run his own calculations and arrive at the same conclusion she'd arrived at in the ash of her homestead. That the situation had moved past the point where most of the usual options applied. "My name is Clara Voss," she said. Her voice was level. She'd been saving these words since the creek, since the smoke, since the silence. "You rode through Hart Valley 4 days ago. You gave the order to burn. You killed a man named Daniel Harte, who was going to be my husband in 14 days. I want you to know my name before this is over, and I want you to know his." "Please," he started. "Say his name," she said. "Daniel Harte." He looked at the Colt, looked at her face, found nothing to negotiate with. Daniel Harte, he said quietly. She held still for a long moment. The camp had gone mostly quiet around them, the fight settling into its conclusion behind her, Grady's men handling the rest. Morning was coming in across the ridgeline, the first thin light finding the edges of the canyon walls and starting to fill them with color. She thought about Daniel, specifically the way he'd looked on the morning before the last morning, standing in the doorway of the house with a cup of coffee, watching the sun come up. The ordinary, uncelebrated, irreplaceable fact of him. Then she stepped back. "Get up," she said. "You're going to Millhaven in chains. The sheriff's jail may be leaky, but I think you'll hold together long enough to hang." She rode into Millhaven on a Friday morning, 8 days after she'd left. Deke Harrow and 4 surviving Redwater boys roped in a line behind Vessel, who carried the weight of it without complaint. Grady had offered to ride in with her. She'd thanked him and declined. This part she needed to do alone. Calhoun was on his porch when she came up the main street. He stood up slowly, shading his eyes against the morning sun, taking in the scene with the expression of a man whose fundamental understanding of several things was being revised simultaneously. She stopped in front of him, handed him the rope. "Deke Harrow," she said, "responsible for at least 6 homestead fires in this territory over the past 2 years, based on what his own men told me. I have names, dates, and 2 witnesses willing to testify." She reached into her coat and handed him the folded list. "I'd start with the names at the top." Calhoun looked at the list, looked at Harrow, looked at Clara. "The other 23, he said, it wasn't quite a question, "are without leadership, without a plan, and down 6 men in 8 days. If you wire the territorial marshal today, you'll have them before winter. Or you can wait, and I'll go back." The way she said it made clear it wasn't a threat. It was simply a statement of available options, delivered by someone who had recently demonstrated her commitment to following through. Calhoun took the rope. "I'll wire the marshal," he said. She nodded, turned Vessel and walked her to the end of the street, tied her at the rail in front of the burned-out land office, sat down on the stone steps and looked at the empty frame of the doorway. She thought about Daniel for a long time. Not the fire, not the end. She'd been living in the end for 8 days and had earned the right to set it down for a while. She thought about the beginning instead. The first time he'd come to her father's place looking for work and spent 3 weeks finding reasons to stay. The way he'd asked her to marry him with such careful, deliberate seriousness, as if proposing was a legal proceeding that required precision. The way she'd laughed, not because it was funny, but because joy sometimes arrives in the form of laughter, and there's no point in apologizing for it. She let herself cry. Not for long. Long enough to be honest about what she'd lost, which was the necessary thing. Grief that isn't felt doesn't go anywhere useful. It just goes underground and waits. When she was done, she stood up, checked the load in the Colt out of habit, the motion already becoming automatic in a way that told her something about who she was becoming. 23 left. The territorial marshal would handle them, or he wouldn't. Either way, she'd said she would go back if necessary. She'd meant it when she said it, and she still meant it now. She untied Vessel, ran a hand down the mare's neck. The canyon country was 40 miles east. She knew the trails now. She knew the water sources and the approaches and the particular way the light moved through that broken terrain in the early morning, filling the red stone with something that was beautiful if you had the distance for it. She had time. She mounted up and rode toward the livery to see about grain and water, and to ask Pruitt whether he still wanted to buy the colt. She thought she might keep it.